Alex had always been loyal to his best friend, Nathan, until the day he discovered a secret that shattered everything. Isabella looked Alex in the eye and whispered, "You have to make a choice. If you love me, you must betray Nathan." Nathan's eyes widened in disbelief as he walked in on Alex and Isabella in a passionate embrace. Alex's car collided with Nathan's on the highway. Their rage and heartbreak exploded, leaving innocent bystanders injured. The day Alex made the ultimate choice, revenge over loyalty, was the day he crossed a line he could never return from. Welcome to the Alibis Exposed, where trust meets betrayal in the dark. Alex had always been the kind of person who valued loyalty above everything else. It was the cornerstone of his character. Nathan, his best friend since childhood, was a successful businessman who had built a reputation for himself in the city. Nathan's rise to power was swift, and Alex had been by his side every step of the way. Through thick and thin, they had always had each other's backs. It was a bond that went beyond friendship. It was brotherhood. Nathan had always been a man of charm, with an effortless ability to make people trust him. People saw him as a charismatic leader, someone who could do no wrong. But Alex had always seen through the surface. He knew Nathan well, perhaps better than anyone else, but even he couldn't deny the success Nathan had achieved. Things started to shift in the last few months. It was subtle at first, small inconsistencies in Nathan's behavior that Alex couldn't ignore. Late-night phone calls, secretive meetings, and vague answers when asked about certain business deals. Nathan had always been a straightforward person, so these changes were out of character. But Alex didn't say anything, not wanting to rock the boat. After all, Nathan had always been there for him. One evening, while they were having drinks at a local bar, Alex overheard a conversation between Nathan and another man. The words weren't clear, but Alex could catch the tone of secrecy. It was a feeling that made his stomach turn. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Something wasn't right. The next morning, Alex followed Nathan, trying to make sense of the situation. What he saw left him shaken. Nathan was meeting with a group of shady individuals, people Alex had never seen before. They were exchanging money and documents, the kind of business dealings that didn't sit right with Alex. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew it wasn't good. That night, Alex confronted Nathan. His best friend, the man he had stood by for years, wasn't the same person he had once known. Nathan's eyes flickered with discomfort when Alex brought up the meeting. "It's nothing, Alex. You don't have to worry about it. Trust me," Nathan had said, his voice almost pleading. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. Nathan was hiding something, and Alex wasn't sure he could trust him anymore. As the days went on, Alex tried to distance himself from the situation. He kept his head down, focusing on his work. But the tension between him and Nathan was palpable. Alex's loyalty was being tested in ways he never imagined, and soon he would find himself caught in a web of lies and betrayal that would force him to make choices he never thought he'd have to make. The days following the confrontation with Nathan were tense. Alex couldn't shake the images of Nathan's secret meetings and the strange men he'd seen him with. Every time they met, Nathan acted as if everything was normal, but Alex could tell something had changed. The unease between them was palpable, and it felt as though a rift had begun to form, one that Alex couldn't repair. Nathan didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he didn't care. He continued to ask Alex for help with more business ventures, each one becoming more suspicious. At first, Alex refused to question it. After all, Nathan had been his best friend for years. But the more he got involved, the more the situation started to make him uncomfortable. It began innocently enough. Nathan asked Alex to run a few errands for him, delivering documents to people Alex had never met. The meetings were always brief and cryptic, but Alex told himself it was just business. He trusted Nathan, and if his best friend needed him, Alex would be there. But slowly, Nathan started to ask more of him, requests that felt increasingly unethical. One day, Nathan asked Alex to drive a package across town to a man Alex had never heard of. "It's important," Nathan said, his voice unusually firm. "I need you to trust me, Alex. This is for the good of the company." Alex hesitated but agreed. It wasn't the first time he had done something like this for Nathan, and he told himself it would be fine. The man he met in a dimly lit alley looked like trouble. He didn't say much, just handed Alex a wad of cash in exchange for the package. The entire exchange felt wrong, but Alex brushed off the nagging feeling in the back of his mind. He did what Nathan asked, and that's what mattered, right? But things didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, Alex found himself becoming more and more entangled in Nathan's world. He was asked to run illegal errands, deliver large sums of money to questionable people, and even cover up small, messy situations that Nathan had gotten himself into. Each time Alex hesitated, Nathan would remind him of everything they had been through together, of the loyalty they had shared, and every time Alex would agree, convincing himself it was for the best. However, things were getting worse. Alex's conscience began to weigh heavily on him. He was involved in activities he never thought he would be part of. But Nathan had a way of making him feel like it was all for a greater purpose, like it was all part of their shared dream. The promises of success, wealth, and power were tempting, and every time Alex tried to step back, Nathan would pull him back in. Then one evening, Nathan asked Alex to accompany him to a private meeting with a powerful businessman. Alex had never heard of the man, but Nathan was eager to make the deal. When they arrived, the air was thick with tension. The businessman was cold and distant, his eyes calculating as he sized up Alex. It was clear that this wasn't a normal business meeting. There was something sinister about the whole situation, but Alex didn't want to question Nathan. As the conversation progressed, Alex began to realize that Nathan wasn't just involved in questionable deals, he was in over his head. The businessman spoke in cryptic terms, talking about money laundering and illegal trades, and Alex realized that Nathan was deep in something dangerous. He was no longer just a businessman trying to make it big. He was part of a criminal underworld that Alex couldn't escape from. Nathan looked at Alex, his face hard. "This is the way things are now. We're too far in to back out." His words struck Alex like a punch to the gut. He had been loyal, yes, but he never imagined things would go this far. The realization hit Alex like a ton of bricks. His loyalty had brought him here, but it had also led him down a dark path. He had been blind to Nathan's true intentions, believing that their friendship would always come first. But now, Alex saw the truth. Nathan wasn't asking for his loyalty out of friendship. He was using it as a tool, manipulating Alex to protect himself. Alex's mind raced. He had always done what Nathan asked without question, but now he saw the weight of the consequences. He had crossed lines he couldn't uncross, and the damage was already done. It was too late to turn back, but could he continue down this path without losing himself completely? He glanced at Nathan, who was talking to the businessman, his smile cold and calculated. Nathan had always been charming, always in control, but now Alex saw him for what he truly was, someone willing to use anyone and everyone to get ahead. Alex's loyalty had been a weapon, one that Nathan had wielded against him. And now it seemed like that loyalty would cost him everything. The weeks that followed felt like a blur. Alex had become more deeply entrenched in Nathan's world, and the lines between right and wrong were blurring faster than he could keep up with. The favors kept coming, each one darker and more dangerous than the last. But it was the arrival of Isabella that would change everything. It was a night like any other when Alex first met her. Nathan had invited him to a party at one of his high-end properties, the kind of event that was filled with money, power, and people who wanted to be seen. Alex had been to countless events like it before, but this time something felt different. As soon as he stepped inside the lavish estate, he felt an unusual pull in the air. There was something about the night that set his nerves on edge. And then he saw her. Isabella stood across the room, her striking beauty impossible to ignore. She was tall, with dark hair that cascaded in waves around her shoulders. Her eyes, deep and captivating, seemed to pull Alex in, like she could see straight through him. She wore a black dress that hugged her curves, effortlessly commanding attention without saying a word. People surrounded her, laughing and chatting, but there was a certain air of mystery that made her stand out from the crowd. Alex didn't know what it was. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, so confident and poised, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. For the first time in a long while, his thoughts were clouded with something other than Nathan's business deals. And when Isabella turned her gaze toward him, their eyes locked for a split second, sending a jolt through his chest. Nathan noticed the way Alex was looking at her and smirked. "Isabella," he said, nodding toward the woman across the room. "She's new in town, just moved here a few weeks ago. Very interesting, isn't she?" Alex gave a half-hearted nod, trying to shake the feeling that had settled in his chest. But deep down, he knew that the pull he felt toward Isabella was stronger than anything he had experienced in a long time. She was more than just beautiful. She was magnetic, and for reasons Alex couldn't explain, he felt drawn to her. Later that night, Nathan introduced them. Isabella greeted Alex with a smile that seemed to light up the room. Her voice was soft, yet firm, and there was something about her that made Alex feel both at ease and on edge. "It's a pleasure." "To meet you, Alex," she said, her eyes lingering on him just a little too long. They talked for a while, and though the conversation was light, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Isabella than she was letting on. She seemed to know things about Nathan, things that Alex wasn't aware of. As the night wore on, Isabella grew more comfortable with the group, laughing and chatting with everyone around her. But Alex noticed that she always seemed to find a way to drift closer to him. It wasn't long before the two of them were spending more and more time together. At first, it was innocent. Small conversations here and there, brief moments of shared laughter. But slowly, something more began to develop. Alex found himself seeking her out in a way he couldn't explain. Every time he saw her, his heart raced and his mind became clouded with thoughts of her. He knew it was wrong. She was Nathan's friend, someone who was part of his inner circle. But the more he tried to resist, the more he found himself pulled in. Isabella, for her part, seemed to enjoy the attention. She was intelligent, charming, and had a way of making Alex feel like he was the only person in the room. They would meet, in private, talking about everything from business to their personal lives. Alex learned that Isabella had a past, a complicated one, filled with secrets that she rarely shared. But every time she spoke, Alex felt like there was something beneath the surface, something hidden in her eyes that she wasn't revealing. And so the attraction between them grew. But it wasn't just physical. Alex found himself wanting to know more about her, to be around her. He hadn't felt this alive in months. It was as if, for the first time, he was seeing the world through a different lens, one that didn't involve Nathan's business deals or the shady people they were dealing with. He was beginning to realize that his loyalty was being tested in ways he never expected. Nathan, of course, noticed the growing closeness between them. He didn't say anything at first, but Alex could tell that something was shifting between them. Nathan's eyes narrowed whenever he caught Alex talking to Isabella, and there was a subtle tension in the air when the three of them were together. But Nathan said nothing. He didn't need to. Alex could see it in his best friend's eyes. He knew what was happening, and he wasn't pleased. One night, after a particularly intense conversation with Isabella, Alex found himself standing on the balcony, staring out at the city lights below. Isabella had left the party early, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that she was something more than just a passing flirtation. As he stood there, trying to collect his thoughts, Nathan joined him, leaning against the railing beside him. "You're getting too close to her," Nathan said quietly, his tone calm but firm. Alex's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected Nathan to bring it up so directly. "What are you talking about?" Alex replied, trying to sound casual. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Nathan said, his voice low. "I don't like it, Alex. I never asked."
"You to get involved with her?" Alex's stomach twisted. It was as if Nathan was testing him, seeing how far he could push him before he snapped. But Alex didn't know what to say.
His feelings for Isabella were undeniable, and the more Nathan tried to control the situation, the more Alex felt like he was being forced to choose between his loyalty to his best friend and his growing feelings for the woman who had captured his heart. The days following the confrontation on the balcony felt like a weight hanging over Alex. Nathan's words echoed in his mind, his warning about getting too close to Isabella. It wasn't that Alex didn't hear the concern in his voice. He did. But there was something else about Isabella that had begun to consume him. He couldn't deny the magnetic pull between them. It was like an unspoken connection, one that neither of them could ignore. Every time they saw each other, there was a new intensity in the air. They would exchange glances that lingered just a second too long, their conversations growing more intimate with every passing day. Alex tried to resist, but the more he fought it, the more he realized that Isabella had become a fixture in his thoughts. She was always there, even when he tried to focus on his work or Nathan's plans. One night, Nathan had asked Alex to stay late at the office to go over some business proposals. It was the kind of thing Alex had done 100 times before, but this night felt different. There was a strange tension in the air, and Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen. He'd been avoiding Isabella for the past few days, trying to distance himself from the temptation that was pulling him in. But fate had other plans. As the clock ticked past midnight, Alex walked through the empty halls of the office, preparing to leave. His mind was heavy, weighed down by the thoughts of Nathan's business dealings, his loyalty, and, of course, Isabella. The attraction was undeniable, but he couldn't afford to act on it, not with everything at stake. And then, just as he reached the elevator, he saw her. Isabella stood in the doorway of the conference room, a soft smile on her lips. She was dressed casually tonight, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled under the fluorescent lights. She looked out of place in the sterile environment of the office, but somehow she fit perfectly. "Alex," she said softly, her voice carrying an air of sweetness that made his heart race.
"I didn't expect to see you still here." Alex paused, his pulse quickening. He'd been trying to avoid her, but the pull of her presence was too strong to resist. "I'm just finishing up some work for Nathan," he said, trying to sound
unaffected. Isabella took a step toward him, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. "You've been working so hard lately, I wanted to see you," she said, her voice lowering as she approached. "You've been distant." Alex's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the heat between them, the tension hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. Every part of him wanted to step back, to maintain the distance that had kept him safe until now, but something in her eyes stopped him. There was a hunger there, something raw and unspoken that drew him in. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice
rough. "I've been distracted." The words were true, but they didn't feel like enough. Isabella stepped even closer, her gaze never leaving his. "You don't have to apologize," she whispered, her hand reaching out to touch his arm.
The simple contact sent a jolt of electricity through him. She was so close now that he could feel her breath on his skin, and the weight of the moment was almost too much to bear. Before Alex could say anything, Isabella closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his, in a kiss that was soft at first but quickly turned urgent. Alex froze for a moment, shocked by the intensity of it, but then something inside him snapped. He kissed her back, his hands pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. Everything else faded away. The office, the business deals, Nathan, they all disappeared into the background as Alex and Isabella became consumed by the heat between them. The kiss was electric, full of pent-up desire and unspoken emotion, and it felt like it had been building for weeks. Alex couldn't remember a time when he had felt this alive, this wanted. Isabella's hands moved to the back of his neck, pulling him closer as she pressed her body against his. The world outside their little bubble ceased to exist. The only thing that mattered was the connection they shared in that moment. As the kiss broke, Alex pulled back slightly, his breath ragged. He looked into her eyes, searching for any hint of hesitation, but there was none. She wanted this just as much as he did. "Isabella, we can't," he started, but she placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. "Shh," she whispered, her voice low and seductive. "We don't have to talk about it right now." Her hand slid down his chest, sending a shiver through him. "Just let it happen." And in that moment, Alex's resolve broke. He didn't care about the consequences, about his loyalty to Nathan, or about the mess he was getting into. All he cared about was Isabella and the way she made him feel. The heat between them was undeniable, and Alex couldn't resist it any longer. The rest of the night was a blur of passion and need. They didn't speak much, but the connection between them was more than enough to fill the silence. It was a physical release, an escape from the reality that had been closing in on Alex. But as the night wore on, guilt began to creep in. He knew he had crossed a line he could never undo. When it was over and they lay together in the quiet of the office, Alex's heart pounded with both excitement and dread. He had given in to his desires, but he knew that the fallout from this moment would be far greater than he could imagine. As he looked at Isabella, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and steady, Alex felt a pang of regret. He had betrayed Nathan's trust, and worse, he had betrayed himself. The loyalty he had held so dear had been shattered in an instant. And now there was no going back. The days after that night blurred together for Alex. What had started as a moment of weakness now felt like an inescapable spiral, pulling him deeper into a world he wasn't sure he could escape from. Isabella's presence lingered in his mind long after they parted ways. Her touch, her scent, the way she made him feel more alive than he had in months. But alongside that desire, there was an unease, a gnawing feeling at the back of his mind that wouldn't go away. He couldn't look at Nathan the same way anymore. Every time they spoke, the weight of his betrayal pressed down on him. He had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. It was one thing to feel drawn to Isabella, but it was something entirely different when the consequences began to show themselves. Isabella, as if sensing his internal struggle, began to draw closer to him. She made every interaction feel intimate, every glance feel charged with unspoken meaning. She knew exactly what to say and when to say it, weaving a web of temptation around him that was impossible to resist. But it wasn't just about the physical attraction anymore. It was about control. One evening, after another tense meeting with Nathan about a new business deal that was growing more complicated by the day, Alex found himself once again in Isabella's presence. Nathan had left the office early, giving Alex a rare moment of solitude. The emptiness of the office felt suffocating, the quiet too loud, and yet, when Isabella appeared at his door, everything seemed to shift. She was standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the hallway lights. "I've been waiting for you," she said, her voice soft but with an edge of authority. "We need to talk." Alex's heart skipped a beat. "About what?" he asked, trying to maintain a calm exterior, but the tension in the room was palpable. He knew where this was going. Isabella stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she moved toward him. Her eyes never left his, and there was an intensity in them that made Alex uneasy, but also drawn in. "You know what's
"Coming, Alex," she said quietly. "You can feel it too." Alex swallowed hard. The weight of her words felt heavy on his chest. "I don't know what you mean," he lied, though he knew better. She stopped in front of him, her hand lightly brushing against his arm. "You're loyal to Nathan," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness. "But loyalty isn't always
enough, is it? Not when it puts you in danger, not when it forces you to make choices that compromise who you really are." Alex frowned, unsure of what she was implying. "What are you asking me to do, Isabella?" he muttered, his voice tight, with restraint. Isabella's lips curled into a slight smile, as though she had been waiting for him to ask that very question. "I'm not asking you to betray him," she said, her tone almost playful. "Not directly, at least. But Nathan's plans are getting riskier. He's already put himself in a position where things could go terribly wrong, and I'm worried."
"Alex, I'm worried for both of us." Alex's gut twisted. "What are you saying?" he asked again, the anxiety rising in his chest. She moved closer, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Nathan's been dealing with people who don't play
by the rules anymore, people who won't hesitate to hurt him, hurt us. If you want to protect me, if you want to protect us, you're going to have to take matters into your own hands." Alex's breath caught in his throat. He had known for weeks that Nathan's dealings were becoming riskier, that there were dark forces closing in on them. But the idea of actively betraying Nathan was something Alex hadn't considered. Not yet. Isabella placed her hand gently on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her fingers.
"Nathan can't protect you the way I can. He doesn't understand what's at stake, what really matters. But I do, Alex. I'm asking you to trust me. You can't keep standing in his shadow, doing his dirty work, hoping things will get better. If you want a future, if you want something real, you have to act now." Alex's mind raced, but his heart beat faster.
The words she spoke rang in his ears, resonating in ways he didn't fully understand. She was right, wasn't she? Nathan didn't see things the way he did. He was consumed by his business and his deals, and Alex was just a pawn, another soldier in the war Nathan had started. But Isabella, she saw him. She understood him in a way that Nathan never could. "Tell me what you need me to do," Alex said, his voice barely a whisper. He felt like he was crossing a line he couldn't uncross, but there was a fire building inside him, one that made him feel like he had no choice. Isabella smiled, but it wasn't the soft smile from before. This one was different, more calculating, more knowing. She stepped back slightly, giving him space to breathe. Nathan's plan to expand his business is going to bring more danger than he realizes. He's trusting the wrong people, people who won't hesitate to turn on him if it means getting ahead. You need to keep an eye on him, get close to those people, find out what they really want. The information you can gather will help us stay one step ahead of him. If you don't do this, we're both at risk. The weight of her words hit him hard. Nathan's empire was built on trust, on loyalty, but it was also built on secrecy, on dealing with people who played by their own rules. Alex had seen enough to know that those people were dangerous. But to go behind Nathan's back? To betray him like that? It was more than just a moral dilemma. It felt like a betrayal of everything Alex had believed in. But Isabella's eyes were pleading, her expression a mix of fear and desire. She needed him, and Alex could feel that need. She had become more than just a woman to him. She was someone who saw him as a person, someone who understood the darkness inside him. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible.
"I'm asking you to do this for me. For us." Alex closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had always believed loyalty was sacred, that it was the one thing that defined him. But now he was standing on
the edge of a choice that would change everything. "I'll do it," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. Isabella's smile widened, and for a moment Alex thought he saw something darker behind her eyes, something that chilled him to his core. But it was too late. He had already crossed the line, and there was no turning back. The following days felt like an unraveling thread that Alex couldn't stop, no matter how hard he tried. His decision to help Isabella to step deeper into the web she had spun around him was already beginning to take its toll. Nathan had become distant, his meetings and phone calls growing more intense. Alex tried to keep things normal between them, but he couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at him every time they spoke. Every glance, every word felt like a lie, and it was only a matter of time before Nathan would notice something was off. It was late one evening when Alex's worst fear came to life. The office was quieter than usual, with only a few staff members, still working late into the night. Alex had stayed behind after a long day, following through on the plan he'd made with Isabella. She'd insisted on meeting him again to discuss more details about Nathan's business dealings. He hadn't planned on things escalating this way, but the connection between him and Isabella was undeniable, and tonight he felt like he had to see her. As Alex sat at his desk, going through some paperwork, his thoughts were far from the business at hand. His mind kept drifting to Isabella, the way she made him feel, the way she needed him. But he was also haunted by the images of Nathan's face, his loyalty to his best friend, now fractured by his own desires. The office phone rang, jolting Alex out of his thoughts. He stared at the caller ID, seeing it was Nathan. His stomach churned. Should he answer? Should he tell him where he was? No, he couldn't risk it. He let the phone ring out, choosing instead to get up and make his way to the conference room where Isabella was waiting. The tension in the air between them was thick, a mix of desire and guilt hanging heavily over Alex's head. Isabella was already there, sitting at the large wooden table, her back to the door, as she flipped through some papers. She didn't hear
him enter, and for a moment, Alex just stood in the doorway watching her. She was as beautiful as ever, but tonight there was something different in her gaze, a hunger, a need. She looked up and smiled when she saw him, a smile that made his heart race despite everything.
"Alex," she said softly, standing up to meet him. "You came," he nodded, but his mind wasn't fully there. He had been hoping for a distraction from his thoughts, but the weight of what was happening between them was sinking in. Isabella closed the distance between them in an instant, her hand resting on his chest. She didn't wait for any words, just pulled him closer and kissed him, her lips soft but demanding. Alex kissed her back, feeling the guilt ebbing away as his body responded to hers, even if his conscience was screaming at him to stop. As they moved to the nearby couch, their movements became more urgent, more desperate. Alex was lost in her, caught up in the passion and the need to escape from the reality that was closing in on him. His phone vibrated again, but he ignored it, focusing only on Isabella and the way she made him feel alive. But just as their actions reached a fever pitch, the door to the conference room swung open. The loud creak of the door and the sudden burst of light from the hallway sliced through the haze of passion. Both Alex and Isabella froze, their bodies still tangled, but their eyes wide in shock. Standing in the doorway was Nathan. His face was a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and hurt. His eyes were wide, his jaw clenched, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He had known something was off for days, but this was worse than anything he had imagined. For a moment, neither Alex nor Isabella could speak. The silence was suffocating, and Alex's heart pounded in his chest, a sickening realization washing over him. This was it, the moment he had been dreading. Nathan stepped into the room, his eyes locked on Alex, then flicking briefly to Isabella. There was no mistaking what he had seen. He didn't need any explanations. He knew. You're really going to do this?" Nathan's voice was low, but the hurt in it was unmistakable. "After everything we've been through?" Alex opened his mouth, but no words came out. His throat was tight, his mind racing for an explanation, but none seemed good enough. The loyalty he had pledged to Nathan, the friendship they had built over years, it all seemed to crumble in an instant. Isabella, on the other hand, stood up slowly, brushing her hair behind her ear, a smirk on her lips. "Nathan, this isn't what you think," she said, her voice too calm, too collected for the situation. "This was going to happen sooner or later. You should have seen it coming." Nathan looked at her, disgust evident in his eyes. "You think I'm stupid?" he spat. "I trusted you."
"And you—" He turned his gaze back to Alex. "You were like a brother to me. How could you do this? How could you—" "Please, Nathan," Alex interrupted, his voice strained. "I didn't plan for any of this. It just happened." Nathan
shook his head, the hurt in his eyes deepening. "You betrayed me. All for her? All for this?" He looked at Isabella with contempt. "You've been manipulating him this whole time, haven't you?" Isabella didn't flinch, her smirk only widening. "It's not manipulation, it's just a matter of priorities. Alex finally understands what really matters, unlike you." Alex's stomach twisted. The words she spoke were true in a way. He had chosen her, hadn't he?
He had thrown away years of loyalty to Nathan for a woman he barely knew, for a woman who had used him to get what she wanted. Nathan turned away, unable to look at either of them any longer. "I don't know who you are anymore, Alex," he said quietly. "I thought you were better than this." With that, Nathan turned and stormed out of the room, leaving Alex standing there, unable to move, unable to speak. The silence that followed
felt like a knife in Alex's chest. He had just lost his best friend, and worse, he had done it willingly. Isabella came up behind him, her hand on his shoulder. "It's done now," she whispered. "He'll never come between us again, but—"
Alex didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel anything except a hollow emptiness that stretched deep inside him.
He had betrayed the one person who had always been there for him, and now he was alone. And worse, he had no idea how deep the consequences of his actions would run. The days after the confrontation in the office felt like a blur for Alex. The weight of Nathan's betrayal, the look of hurt and disbelief in his best friend's eyes, haunted him. He couldn't shake the image of Nathan walking out of that room, leaving Alex standing there with nothing but the echo of his own guilt. And yet, in the pit of his stomach, something darker had started to grow, a fierce sense of betrayal, not just toward Nathan, but toward himself. He had allowed Isabella to manipulate him, to tear apart everything he had ever valued for a fleeting moment of passion. The anger bubbling inside him was enough to make him question everything he had ever believed in. But it wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about revenge. It was about feeling that something had been taken from him, and he wasn't going to let it go without fighting back. That night, as Alex drove down a quiet street, he could feel his mind racing. He had tried calling Nathan, but the calls went unanswered. He had no idea where his friend was, but he didn't care. He was consumed by a need to take control, to make things right in his own twisted way. Suddenly, a flash of headlights in his rearview mirror caught his attention. Alex's heart skipped a beat when he recognized the vehicle. It was Nathan's car. The anger that had been simmering inside him flared, and without thinking, Alex slammed his foot on the accelerator. Nathan's car was tailing him now, matching his speed as if he were trying to force Alex to slow down. But Alex wouldn't give him the satisfaction. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his hands shaking with adrenaline and frustration. Isabella's face flashed in his mind, the way she had manipulated him, the way she had convinced him that this was the only way forward. But this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about proving something, proving to himself that he wasn't weak, proving that Nathan, the man who had always been his rock, was no longer the person he needed. Suddenly Nathan's headlights flashed in Alex's rearview mirror again, a signal that Nathan was trying to force him to pull over. But Alex wasn't going to back down. With a surge of anger, he swerved his car to the left, cutting Nathan off and sending them both into a reckless game of cat and mouse down the darkened street. The road was narrow, lined with trees on both sides, but neither man cared about the danger they were putting themselves in. Their emotions were too raw, too volatile to think about the consequences. The only thing that mattered was the fight, the desperate need to make the other feel the pain they had caused. Nathan sped up, trying to get ahead, but Alex wasn't having it. He swerved again, this time much harder, clipping the side of Nathan's car. The force sent both vehicles veering off course, tires screeching as they fought to regain control. For a split second, Alex thought they might both crash, but they managed to straighten out, the metal of their cars screeching as they scraped against one another. The noise was deafening, and the adrenaline coursing through Alex's veins made him feel like he was untouchable. This wasn't just a crash, it was a statement. He wasn't backing down. But then, in a moment of pure rage, Nathan made a mistake. He swerved toward Alex's car, his tires skidding across the asphalt. The impact was sudden, jarring, and violent. The sound of metal colliding with metal was followed by the sickening crunch of shattered glass and bent steel. Both cars spun, out of control, skidding off the road and crashing into the trees on the side. Alex's head slammed against the steering wheel, and everything went black for a moment. When he opened his eyes, his body was aching, his vision blurry. The car was crumpled, the airbags deployed, and the smell of smoke filled the air. His ears rang from the crash, and for a moment he could only focus on the pain in his head. Through the haze, he heard the sound of voices, shouting, people screaming in panic. The accident had caused more damage than either of them could have
imagined. Alex struggled to unbuckle his seatbelt, his hands shaking as he tried to push open the door. When he stepped out of the wreckage, he saw the full extent of the damage.
Nathan's car had come to a stop further down the road, its front end smashed in. There were other cars on the road, people who had been caught in the chaos of their reckless driving. Some were trying to help, others were dialing for help on their phones. The sound of sirens grew louder, but Alex didn't care. He couldn't focus on anything but the wreckage, the destruction that had unfolded in an instant. This wasn't just about him and Nathan anymore. They had dragged innocent people into this. He had hurt others in his blind pursuit of revenge, and now there was no going back. Nathan stumbled out of his car, his face bloodied, his shirt torn. He looked around, his eyes wild with disbelief and rage. "What the hell is wrong with you, Alex?" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Look at what you've done!" Alex looked at him, his hands still shaking, his body numb from the crash. "I didn't do this alone, Nathan. You were right there with me. We both made this happen." Nathan's expression faltered, the realization of their actions slowly sinking in. They had both crossed a line that couldn't be erased. The damage wasn't just physical, it was emotional, and it ran deeper than either of them had anticipated. The sound of police sirens and the flash of lights made Alex's heart race. He knew that their lives would never be the same again. They had crossed a line, and now they would have to face the consequences. But in that moment, as the sirens grew louder and the world seemed to close in around him, Alex felt something else, a hollow emptiness. The adrenaline had faded, and all that was left was the wreckage of his choices, the lives he had ruined, and the friendship he had destroyed. The sound of the sirens grew louder, cutting through the thick, tense air that surrounded the wreckage of both cars. Alex stood there, his clothes torn, his body bruised and aching from the crash. His mind was spinning, processing the sheer destruction he had just caused, first the accident, and now the violence that was quickly escalating between him and Nathan. The flashing lights painted the scene in red and blue hues, adding an almost surreal sense of urgency to everything. Alex could feel the eyes of the bystanders on him, judging him as police cars screeched to a halt nearby. He tried to gather his thoughts, but it was hard to focus when everything felt like it was unraveling so quickly. He had crossed a line that would have consequences far beyond this moment. Nathan, just as disoriented and angry as Alex, stood with a limp, his hand on the side of his car as he steadied himself. His eyes, bloodshot and filled with a mix of rage and disbelief, met Alex's. For a moment, there was a silent understanding between them. Neither of them could undo what had just happened. There was no going back, Alex. Nathan's voice was shaky, filled with raw emotion. Look at what we've done. What the hell happened to us? Alex didn't answer. He couldn't. The weight of his choices had settled on him like a heavy burden, one that was too much to bear. He had been so consumed by his anger, by his need for revenge against Nathan for the betrayal he thought he had suffered, that he had allowed everything to spiral out of control. The police officers moved quickly to assess the situation. Two of them approached Alex and Nathan, demanding that they stay still as they moved toward the wreckage. Alex's heart raced as one of the officers eyed him suspiciously, noticing the blood on his hands and the panic in his eyes. Both of you stay put, the officer barked, his tone firm. We're going to need your statements, but for now, we need to secure the scene. Alex barely heard him, too caught up in his own thoughts. He was aware of the bystanders still watching, their eyes filled with fear, pity, and disgust. The wreckage was everywhere, shattered glass, bent metal, and the twisted remains of what had once been two cars. But there was something deeper in the air, something that felt almost suffocating. Guilt, anger, and regret swirling together. Suddenly Nathan broke the silence, stepping toward Alex with a look of fury in his eyes. You think this is over? He spat. You think we can just walk away from this? You've destroyed everything. You've destroyed me. Alex met his gaze, and for a moment he saw the hurt in Nathan's eyes. It was the same hurt he had seen in his best friend's eyes after the office confrontation. But now it was sharper, more dangerous. Nathan was no longer the friend he had trusted. The loyalty they once shared was gone, replaced by something darker, something that would only lead to more destruction. Before Alex could say anything, Nathan took a step forward, his face contorted with rage. You were my brother, Alex, and
You've made me your enemy, he growled, his fist swinging toward Alex's face with brutal force. The punch landed hard, and Alex stumbled backward, his cheek stinging with the impact.
blood dripped from his lip, and his vision blurred for a second, but the pain only fueled the fire inside him. The adrenaline was pumping now, his body responding instinctively. He had no idea what he was doing, but all he could feel was the
anger, the betrayal, and the need to make Nathan feel the same way. Alex swung back, his fist connecting with Nathan's jaw.
The force of the punch sent Nathan staggering, but he didn't fall. Instead, he lunged forward, tackling Alex to the ground. The two men wrestled in the dirt and broken glass, their anger and frustration driving them to fight without thinking. Is this what you wanted? Nathan shouted as they rolled over the ground, their fists pounding into each other's faces. Is this the price of your loyalty? You think Isabella is worth all of this, worth destroying everything we built together? Alex didn't answer. The only thing that mattered in that moment was the need to make Nathan feel the same pain he had, the need to make him understand that he was not the one who had been wronged in this twisted game. He had to make Nathan see how much he had been betrayed, how much he had lost. Another blow landed, this time to Nathan's ribs, and the sound of cracking bone echoed in the silence. Nathan let out a gasp of pain, but he didn't stop. His hands were around Alex's throat now, tightening with every second, his anger threatening to suffocate both of them. Alex's vision blurred, his breath coming in short gasps. His hands shot up to grab Nathan's wrists, trying to pry them off his neck. The violence of their struggle had drawn the attention of the police officers, but no one dared to intervene. They could see the fury and desperation in both men's eyes, a battle that wasn't just physical, but emotional, a war that had been building for months. The officer who had spoken earlier rushed forward, shouting for the two men to stop, but it was too late. Nathan had pulled Alex back up to his feet, his fists raised once more. They were both bloodied now, their faces bruised, their bodies aching from the relentless violence. "You ruined everything," Nathan shouted, his voice hoarse. "Everything I've worked for, everything we were supposed to be, all for a woman who never cared about you." With a final, desperate cry, Alex swung again, his fist landing with all the force he could muster. This time it connected with Nathan's temple, sending him crashing to the ground. Nathan didn't get back up. His body lay motionless on the
asphalt, blood pooling around his head. Alex stood over him, panting, his breath ragged.
He could barely believe what had just happened. The rage that had consumed him now felt empty, like a void that swallowed everything he had once cared about. The police officers rushed to Nathan's side, checking for signs of life, but the damage
had already been done. The damage to their friendship, to their futures. There was no going back from this. "Get on the ground," one of the officers shouted, pushing Alex down to his knees. "You're under arrest." Alex didn't fight.
He couldn't. The weight of everything, the destruction, the violence, the betrayal, was too much. He let the officers handcuff him, his eyes glazed over with the cold realization of what he had just done. The sirens grew louder in the distance, but for Alex, it was the sound of his life shattering beyond repair. The days that followed were a blur of cold, sterile rooms, endless paperwork, and the harsh clank of handcuffs. Alex sat in the holding cell, staring at the concrete walls, his mind racing with thoughts that felt too heavy to bear. His body ached from the violence of the past few days, but it was the emotional toll that left him feeling drained. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and now he was paying the price. The police had arrested him on charges of assault, reckless endangerment, and a dozen other offences stemming from the crash. The crash that had, in one chaotic moment, destroyed not just their cars, but their lives. But it wasn't just the legal consequences that weighed on Alex. It was the realization that he had been manipulated, used and betrayed in ways he had never imagined. He thought about Isabella, the woman who had promised him everything and delivered nothing. He thought about how she had played him, using his feelings for her to manipulate him into hurting Nathan, the one person he had trusted more than anyone. She had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited everything, and yet now she was gone. She had disappeared after the crash, leaving no trace behind, no explanation, no apology. And then there was Nathan, the man who had once been his best friend, his brother. Alex couldn't get the image of Nathan's lifeless body out of his mind. The sound of his skull cracking when Alex had delivered that final blow, the sickening realization that he had taken it too far. Nathan was in the hospital, unconscious, but alive. The doctors said he might recover, but Alex knew the truth. Their friendship was dead. There was no coming back from what had happened. But as Alex sat there in the cell, staring at the walls, something inside him began to change. The anger, the frustration, the sense of betrayal. It was still there, gnawing at him, but it was now replaced with a cold, calculated resolve. He had been used, manipulated, and in the end, betrayed. He had trusted Nathan, and for what? So that Nathan could use him to further his own agenda? The truth hit Alex like a ton of bricks. Nathan had never cared about him. Not really. Nathan had used Alex as a pawn in his own game, and Alex had played along because of loyalty, because of the unshakable belief that their friendship meant something. But Nathan had taken advantage of that loyalty, twisting it into something dark
and dangerous. Alex had been a fool, but he wasn't going to be a fool anymore. His mind raced with plans of revenge, not just on Nathan, but on the entire web of lies that had been spun around him. He had been a part of it, played a role in the
destruction of everything he held dear. But now it was time to take control. It was time to make Nathan pay for what he had done. The cell door clanged open and Alex was jolted from his thoughts. A police officer stepped in, holding a file in his hand. "Alex Monroe," he said, his tone impersonal. "You're being transferred. Your lawyer's here." Alex didn't respond. He had no desire to speak to a lawyer, not yet. He didn't care about the legal consequences right now. All he cared about was making Nathan feel the same pain, the same destruction that Alex had felt. As he was led out of the cell, Alex glanced. Around the dimly lit hallway, his mind already working. He had no idea where Isabella was, but he didn't need her anymore. She had served her purpose, and now she was just another piece of the puzzle that had shattered his life. Nathan, however, was different. Nathan was the one who had used him, the one who had pushed him to the breaking point. And now Alex was going to make him pay. The lawyer arrived shortly after, a man with a sharp suit and a sharp tongue. "I can get you out of here, Alex," he said, flipping through the file. "It's going to cost you, but we can make it happen. We can get these charges reduced." Alex didn't hear most of what the lawyer said. His thoughts were too consumed with the idea of revenge. He didn't care about the charges, didn't care about the consequences anymore. Nothing mattered, except for the truth that had been revealed to him in the most brutal way possible. Nathan had used him. And now Alex was going to use that same loyalty to destroy him. The lawyer continued speaking, but Alex's mind was already elsewhere, already planning. When they finally released him on bail, Alex didn't waste any time. He had a plan, one that involved Nathan, one that would make Nathan understand what it felt like to be betrayed, to be used. Days later, Alex found Nathan in a private hospital room, surrounded by expensive medical equipment, his body bruised and battered from their fight. The moment Alex stepped into the room, Nathan's eyes shot open, filled with a mix of confusion and rage. "You," Nathan spat, his voice weak but filled with venom. "What the hell do you want?" Alex stepped closer, his eyes cold and calculating. "I came to see my best friend," he said, his voice low, almost mocking. "But it seems like you've forgotten what that means." Nathan's eyes narrowed, his body tensing as he struggled to sit up. "You think I don't know what you've been up to? You think I don't know you've been planning something?" Alex didn't answer. He simply stared at Nathan, watching the man who had once been his closest ally, now reduced to this. Nathan had been everything to him until Alex realized the truth. "I know you used me," Alex finally said, his voice steady. "I know you used me to cover your tracks, to get what you wanted. And I was too loyal, too blind to see it. But not anymore. I'm done being your fool." Nathan looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. He knew Alex was right. Everything they had shared, everything they had been through, had been a lie. Nathan had used Alex for his own gain, and now Alex was going to make him pay. Without another word, Alex walked to the side of Nathan's bed, picking up a syringe that was lying on the table next to the IV drip. It was quick, silent, and efficient. Nathan's eyes widened as he saw the syringe in Alex's hand, but it was too late. He tried to move, tried to fight, but Alex's grip was firm, and the needle found its mark in an instant. Nathan's body jerked for a moment, then fell still. Alex stood there, watching as the life drained from his once best friend. The man who had used him, manipulated him, and betrayed him was finally paying the price for everything he had done. Alex didn't feel satisfaction, didn't feel relief. He felt empty, hollow, as if everything he had done had been for nothing. The moral of the story hit him like a ton of bricks. Loyalty can be a weapon, but it can also be a trap. And now Alex had become the weapon. But in the end, it had destroyed him too. As Nathan's life slipped away, Alex walked out of the room, leaving behind the man who had once been his brother. The doors swung closed behind him, and Alex knew that this was the last time he would ever look back. The room was cold, the dim, light flickering from a single lamp that cast long, distorted shadows across the walls. Alex sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes hollow, staring out the window into the dark night. The world outside seemed so distant, so irrelevant, as though it no longer mattered. All that mattered now was the crushing weight of his actions, the irreversible damage he had caused, the blood that stained his hands. He had never imagined that it would come to this, the death of Nathan, his best friend, the one person who had once been his family. He had never imagined that the loyalty he had so fiercely protected would be the very thing that led him to destroy everything he had ever cared about. The betrayal, the violence, the lies. It had all built up to this moment, a moment where Alex felt nothing but the deepest sorrow and guilt. He tried to shake the images of Nathan's lifeless body
from his mind, but they kept coming back.
Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the man who had once been his brother, now just a cold corpse, the life drained from him by Alex's own hand. The sound of Nathan's final breath echoed in his mind, and Alex could feel the weight of his
own actions pressing down on him, suffocating him. The guilt was unbearable.
It was like a poison eating away at his soul. He had done what he thought was necessary, what he thought would make him feel better, but now all he felt was an emptiness that seemed impossible to fill. He had lost everything, his friend, his morality, his sense of self. All of it was gone, taken by the very hands that had once held so much promise and hope. Alex's hands trembled as he reached for the bottle of pills on the nightstand. It was the only thing that had offered him a glimpse of relief, a way to escape the pain that consumed him. His fingers hovered over the pills, the weight of the decision hanging heavy in the air. He had thought about this moment many times, but now that it was here, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like the only way out. As his hand closed around the bottle, he thought about Isabella. The woman who had lured him into this mess, who had used him to destroy his own life. She had been a distraction, a temptation, and in the end, she had only made things worse. But even she, with all her beauty and lies, couldn't have prepared him for the devastation that followed. She had vanished without a trace, leaving him to face the consequences of his own actions. His mind drifted to Nathan again, the betrayal, the fight, the final blow that had silenced him forever. He had done what he thought was right in that moment, but now it felt like nothing more than a cruel mistake. The man who had once been his closest ally, his brother, was gone, and it was his fault. A sharp pain pierced through Alex's chest as the reality of it all hit him once more. He had chosen to betray his own values, to turn his back on everything he had once believed in, all in the name of loyalty. But in the end, it had all been a trap. His loyalty had been nothing more than a weapon used against him, and now there was no way to take it back. Alex closed his eyes, trying to push the tears back. But they came anyway, hot and relentless, streaking down his face as the weight of his guilt finally broke through. He had lost his best friend, his morals, his sense of self. There was nothing left for him now. The bottle of pills felt heavy in his hand. He didn't want to die. He didn't want to end it like this. But what choice did he have? What other option was there? He had crossed a line, and now the only way to escape the suffocating guilt was to end it all. There was no redemption left. For him, no way to undo the damage he had done. With shaking hands, Alex unscrewed the cap of the bottle and poured the pills into his palm. The cold, sterile pills stared back at him, a silent promise of escape. He hesitated for a moment, but only for a moment. He couldn't bear the thought of living with the weight of his actions any longer. He couldn't live with the knowledge that he had destroyed everything that had ever mattered to him. With one final deep breath, Alex swallowed the pills. It was the end. The end of everything. As he lay back on the bed, his vision began to blur. The room seemed to fade in and out, the world around him slipping away. He thought of Nathan one last time, his eyes searching for forgiveness that would never come. He thought of Isabella, the woman who had led him down this path of destruction, and for the first time he felt a twinge of anger toward her. But it was fleeting, just as everything else seemed to fade away. The last thing Alex felt was the weight of his own guilt lifting from his shoulders, as if the darkness had finally claimed him. And with that final breath, Alex Monroe, the man who had once been full of hope, of loyalty, of dreams, slipped into the silence. The trap had been sprung, and Alex was its final victim.
Months passed, but the story of Alex Monroe and Nathan's tragic end would not be forgotten. The crash, the violence, the betrayals. It was all a whisper on the wind, a shadow over the lives of those who had been close to them. Nathan recovered,
But not in the way anyone had hoped. The man who had once been a successful businessman was now a ghost of his former self. The betrayal by his best friend weighed heavily on him, and he lived with the knowledge that his own actions had pushed Alex into madness, but the guilt, like a cold shadow, would never leave him. He knew he had played a role in the destruction of the man who had once been his closest ally. Isabella, meanwhile, had disappeared from the radar completely. Authorities couldn't track her, and no one knew where she had gone. She had been a catalyst, a manipulator, and now she was nothing more than a fleeting memory in the wreckage of what had once been. As for Alex, his grave stood alone in a quiet, forgotten corner of the cemetery. A small, simple stone marked his passing, a life extinguished by guilt and betrayal. His story had ended, but the pain he left behind lingered in the hearts of those who had known him. Loyalty had been his strength and his curse. In the end, Alex's life was a painful reminder. Loyalty can build bridges, but it can also tear them down. And sometimes the things we hold on to most tightly are the very things that destroy us.